Well, I guess with taking the initiative to attend 1150 and having made that financial sacrifice to be able to be a career changer, when you go out and you perform the job searches, you don't see anything for technically an entry level, specifically Python developer or even web-based. So it's just really confusing or a little bit discouraging of what someone in that position should do as far as getting their foot in the door.
When you're looking for Python, how do you spell it?
When I what?
When you're looking for Python jobs, how do you spell it?
PYTH.
See, that's wrong. That's what they don't teach you apparently at 1150. It's spelled DATA space science or AI or machine learning or any of those things. All the cool shit, every single piece of it is written in Python.
But I specifically look for database analyst. I look for all of those other roles, and they're not at the entry level. They want 10 years of experience, and so again, how do you get started?
So I know in the past I've helped go through resumes when people have been applying at my current position, and we get a lot of resumes. But the thing is that I would say even if somebody's posting for a senior level position or something like that, it never really hurts to apply, even if it's just for a junior role. People tend not to advertise the junior roles because it just tends to be the case where someone will just get flooded with just hundreds of resumes if they do. So that's the big thing on that.
I can confirm that we like to have about one senior to every 3-4 juniors, and there are never enough seniors, so we perpetually just keep a senior ad out there, and if anyone is less experienced than we desired, we'll hire them as a junior, and then just keep the senior ad out there.
A little secret, big companies have no idea what they actually need, just apply for the job. Come on.
Just to add to that is the people that know what they need, they didn't write the job posting. The person that wrote it is an HR, and HR doesn't know anything technical at all. So they just Google other people's job postings and copy and paste them, and they're all crap. That's why you get a lot of postings for senior level people and then jobs for juniors that they want to pay you minimum wage for. And everyone that was here at the last Fishbowl knows what I think you should tell them.
I'm doing .NET right now, so I can't really relate to you guys. Came here to support my awesome teacher, Connor. But I don't really care what programming language I'm working in, so can I apply to all the jobs and then hopefully, I just want to solve problems, honestly. That's why I came here. You guys solve some pretty cool problems with Python that you can't do in .NET, unfortunately, so I'll concede that. Nothing else, though.
So I'd say, yeah, apply for all the jobs. And one thing that is kind of hard to appreciate when you're just starting out is that once you pick up one language, it gets really easy to pick up another one if you need to. Most of the concepts will transfer over, and you can very easily you might be learning different words for things, but most of the techniques will transfer.
So I'll just add one more anecdote. I do data science and machine learning in Python. The job I actually got was advertised as for Java, and it mentioned machine learning, but it was a lot of other things that they sort of wanted. So someone said the person writing the job ad doesn't necessarily know what they want. And then, I eventually got the job, and when we looked at the tools, we did go to Python because they're like, hey, this makes more sense for data science. Let's do it that way. And I guess the one other anecdote I have is if you want a job in something that's using Python, but for another skill, especially machine learning, if you can do talks here, I did a talk for something for IndyPy, and someone was like, hey, we're hiring, and I saw your talk. So do stuff like that.
No, I was just going to pop back up.
Oh, okay. You want to go in right now? Also on that note, is there anything that, because we got some employers in here, some pretty cool people. What do you guys think boot camp grads are usually lacking when you're comparing it to like other graduates or people coming from another language? I was just curious.
Confidence in knowing how to bullshit. Like, I mean, so you asked about, .NET, C#, right? .NET, like C# and Python, like if you add some curly braces, they're basically the same thing. Like if you saw that like crazy square bracket thing I did up there, in C# that's called link, right?
We love that.
Yeah, everyone does. That's why, list comprehensions are better and faster than Python, but whatever. No, I think that a lot of people, what you lack is like the attitude of, I'm bad to ask this for because I just want to tell everyone to screw off all the time. But like just being able to sit down and go like, no, I'm qualified for this. You're the one that's wrong. You know what I mean? Like.
Yeah.
This guy's laughing.
Also, if there's ever a particular role that you're interested in, it never hurts to say maybe if you don't want to go through the whole process of doing cover letter, everything, if there might not be a junior role or something like that advertised. It never hurts just kind of reach out to somebody that might be in a position for the team that they're hiring for or something like that. Just ask whether they might be interested in hiring any juniors or anything like that.
Cool. Well, that's basically our time. We got like 10 seconds left. So if anyone has anything they really need to add, you got to run. You got to run. You got to run.
So what I want to know is where did all of the BSD love come out of the woodwork for recently? Where it
6 feet up. ZFS. That's what we're allowed to talk
is a very interesting thing because it's not something you would have ever read around the internet about probably in the last 6 years. It was just like Linux focused to such an extent that I don't know. It's like kind of mind blowing to see it come out again. And also, I think like being talked about by people who have absolutely no idea what the differences even are.
It's hipster, and that's why people are doing it.
I'm going to tell you to ask that question again when Calvin's here, and he'll explain it to you. But we're out of time on this question, and we're going to move on to the next question. So all of you get up and go do other things, and hopefully maybe if you'll come back in a second. So we've got this is not the greatest question in the world. It's Flask or Django, which like is that really a question? It's Flask is obviously the answer. So if anyone would like to talk about this, if you're not familiar with Flask and Django, they are both frameworks, web frameworks written in Python. Django powers the largest Python application in the world. It's called Instagram. And Flask actually powers, I think that Flask is what like Twitter was written in at one point in time. Yeah, so, all right, we've already got 4 people up here. So let's start the timer. And who asked the question? Oh, well, no. I think we can all figure it out. He doesn't like more than 3 words in sentences.
So hopefully this question makes sense because I don't really do Python professionally, but I was wondering how you take like a web framework like Flask or Django and apply that in a serverless environment. Is that relevant at all? Yeah, like can you leverage pieces of the framework for serverless?
Amazon Lambda now supports Python, so you can do serverless that way. These aren't the tools you would use if you wanted to do serverless. Flask is a great tool for microservices. Django can be as well.
I will say that Zappa is a tool that you can use to implement either of these things in a serverless environment. So Zappa will abstract away at the WSGI layer, WSGI. So either of these support the WSGI protocol. So you still have a choice of Flask or Django. Personally, I would lean towards Flask for serverless. If you're starting brand new with any kind of application and you don't have any idea, like your data layer, your ORM, any of that stuff, I would say pick Django because it makes a lot of those choices for you. It's easier to get started, and you don't really care. But if you're coming to web development from a different framework or language, and you have opinions about how data is stored or serialized or any of these things, pick Flask, and then you can choose your ORM layer and switch things out a lot easier than Django.
My advice or recommendation to someone thinking about a question like this, or you who asked it, is to do some tutorials on Flask or bottle.py, and then go and watch the original Ruby on Rails talk by the creator, because that talk will set you through, like, mentally what a larger framework like Django sets out to do, and it's very fascinating and, like, really exciting to see how far and how not far we've come since that conception of, like, how do we tie our database into our objects into our website. And it's all very cool to just see that in a talk, I think, more than looking through documentation for days and weeks and not knowing what to do.
I think Flask is 100% better than Django, just because Flask's design is it's a lot better. One, because everything revolves around the app object. If you have whatever Flask object you have, that is what is you're appending blueprints to, or if you're using Flask REST Plus, you're appending namespaces to, or you're adding namespaces in different models like that. And like, forget who said it, you can choose your own extensions, which is awesome. Django does have extensions that you can use, but Flask has a huge ecosystem of everything that you could possibly imagine. A lot of the big ones, including like Flask Heroku, Flask AWS, I think that's the one. And there's a whole bunch of other ones that you can import, and it just works.
Really depends on what you want to do, right? So like Django is batteries included, and Flask is you roll your own everything basically. So like I kind of disagree with James on the start with Django. It depends. Django is a lot more complicated to figure out. If you just want to have something respond to you when you make a web request, Flask is the way to go. So like if you just want to slap together a simple API, Flask is probably the answer over Django. So it really depends on what you're looking to do. And so if you came up here and made it more clear, we could actually answer that question.
So this might be a little bit too in-depth here, but one of the big problems that Django tries to solve and that Flask tries to solve to a lesser degree, it's called the object impedance mismatch. Basically, when you have data and you have it stored in the database in tables, everything is all line by line, static. You got all these properties for it, et cetera. But you also have objects in your programming languages, and you need a way to kind of store those and get it into the database and out of the database. To get around that, something called the active record pattern kind of evolved. And so that's what Ruby on Rails and Django kind of use to help get data in and out of the database and just kind of hand wave away some of the issues of taking every individual thing and turning it into an object. But
You made that really complicated.
I did. I know. I'm sorry.
I just want to say that we like Django because it's more opinionated and batteries included. It is easier to add people to your team that are able to contribute immediately. With Flask being so modular, you have to worry about picking tools that everyone's going to be familiar with.
So a lot of it comes down to like what your application actually is, right? So if you're writing something that's CRUD, like it's literally all you're doing is you're putting a front end in front of a database, which is 90% of every website you've ever used, then Django, from day one, that's what you do, because your CRUD is, there's nothing creative in CRUD. Your front end developers do all the creative stuff, right? And your database admins. Flask is when you don't know what the thing is that you're trying to do yet. So when you have that like startup or whatever, and you're like, well, we don't know what we're doing yet, and we got to iterate a lot, Flask, 100%. I think the basic Hello World Flask app is like 5 lines. No, it's actually 8 lines, and that includes that includes 2 lines of white space. And so like with Django, the basic Django app is something like, it's like 20 directories of files. And you don't know what any of them do until you've been writing Django for like 2 months. So Flask is if you want to iterate quickly. Django is if you know that you're going to be doing a database-heavy CRUD app. And then CRUD is create, read, update, delete from a database. That's really what it comes down to.
I just want to shill for the cookie cutter Django template. If you are starting a Django project, it has a lot of ideal configs that you do not have to set up. You're going to end up doing those things anyway most of the time.
So for Flask, if you want to learn Flask, there's a gentleman named Miguel Grenberg who wrote a book, it's a tutorial called the Flask Mega Tutorial. That's the place to learn Flask. And then for Django, don't do the Django.org tutorial because it's crap. It's actually the thing that makes that framework suck the most, I think. There's a group called Django Girls. And even though the name makes it sound like it's only for girls, anyone is allowed to do it. And Django Girls tutorial is 1,000,000 times better than the Django official tutorial. So if you want to learn Django, do that one. If you want to learn Flask, do the Flask Mega tutorial.
The Django REST framework is a great framework if you are looking to build an API. Is anyone here familiar with anything similar for Flask?
Flask REST Plus.
What was that?
Flask REST Plus. So Flask REST Plus is, it was originally meant to be, I think it came from Flask REST. I can't remember the name for it, but it was an extension, like version 2.0 of some other extension. Yeah, RESTful. Yeah, that's right. That was meant for Flask to build APIs for. Django's Django REST framework does it great because you can add on top of an API on top of your already current web app. But Flask REST Plus handles all your marshalling. It handles all your JSON. It includes Swagger documentation that you can also incorporate like DTOs and choose what you want to return. That it's done for you. So it's very similar to what Flask does for you for web apps, but Flask REST Plus changes it, and it knows you're trying to build an API, and it uses the Open API incentive. Use the Open API incentive to document and make sure like everything's the way it should be, RESTful.
But if you know that all you're writing is an API, IndyPy is probably one of the ones that you want to check out. So IndyPy is a framework that doesn't get talked about a lot. And I actually learned about it because of an IndyPy web conference, which is coming up again in August. A couple years ago, and one of the guys, Joe Caulfield, who works at Kenzie, he actually did a presentation on IndyPy, and it was the clear winner on it. If you know you're only writing an API, IndyPy is the winner. Flask is if you're trying to iterate quickly and write whatever. Django's a thing if you're writing CRUD. So those are the facts.
What is everyone using for WebSockets with Flask or Django?
Who uses WebSockets? That was an actual question. I don't know.
I typically slap Node onto a project just for WebSockets, just because it's that much easier.
What are you using WebSockets for?
Mostly just simple messaging or notifications within a web app.
I use this thing called HTTP for that. I'm just being a smartass. I'm not smart enough to use WebSockets. We have 1 second. Oh, Court, I'm sorry. All right, so we're going to move on to the last question, which I already, the person who asked this one definitely has to come up here because I accidentally already said the facts of this. Whoever you are. Oh, wait. Oh, we have a tie now. Sorry. I didn't notice that. No. Okay, well, I already answered what are the top 3 applications of Python outside of science. That's Instagram and Dropbox and other giant companies like Twitter and Reddit and all those things. So yeah, that one's out already. I answered it. So let's go on to automation, fun projects, but I'm not a programmer. What are the base? Oh, where do I get my code critiqued? Oh, I can answer this one also. Just send it to me. Buy me a case of beer and then listen to me for half an hour. We need 4 people up here plus the person that asked the question. 3 people plus the person that asked the question.
You've already seen his code quality.
anyone that knows him, a half hour is a lie. So.
Well, that's a chair right there. Get your booty in it. It's the most polite thing I've said all night, isn't it? Get your booty in it. All right, so we've only got one new face up here now. So, anybody really?
So are we starting the timer?
We're gonna
I know. I was gonna hand it to him, but I don't want to get a head start.
Just do it, Aaron.
Okay. So my name's AR. As I wrote up there, I'm writing code. And when I say writing code, I'm basically just going to Stack Overflow or other websites and finding stuff that works. And
He makes $500,000 a year doing it.
stitching it together and doing it for work projects, whether it's automating something or test technician applications that they can use mostly in Excel, VB type stuff really, and some Python stuff. So I don't really know if what I'm writing is efficient or good or anything like that. And so what's a good place to get stuff critiqued, improved?
I don't know if you're a member of the Indie Hackers Slack channel. I think that's probably the best place. Really friendly, good place. You don't even have to live in Indianapolis to be a member, but don't tell anyone. Or tell everyone, yeah. I think that's the most direct answer. Besides, you probably are a programmer. If you can do any of that, if you can use Excel, you're probably going to be more efficient at a computer than anyone else. If you know how to type with more than 2 fingers, you're probably better than most people on a computer.
I was just gonna say, if you the obvious thing of if you don't have a GitHub account or something like that, just throw some stuff on there. And I'm pretty sure there's a subreddit for this too. I think where you can.
But don't go to the subreddit. I have really thick skin, and I curse and yell all the time about everything. The Python subreddit is one of the most toxic places on the internet, and I am not saying that lightly. I would stay away from it. Legitimately, that's not even a joke. IndyPy, or the IndyPy Slack and Indie Hacker Slack. But there's a really important thing here that we haven't addressed, and it's why does it matter if you're Pythonic? I actually I've started seeing Pythonic in a lot of, is my code Pythonic? I've seen that a lot in beginners, and it doesn't matter. It's just when you see beginners that are in academies and stuff, and they talk about how they have, what is that complex where imposter syndrome or whatever, and it's no, you don't have imposter syndrome. You just suck. And that's really okay because you're learning. It's the same thing when people are is my code Pythonic? It really doesn't matter. But if you're actually learning and interested in learning more about this stuff, there's a book, Automate the Boring Stuff. If you're doing stuff with Excel and basic automation and stuff like that, that book, written by a gentleman named Al Swaggart, who's a giant goofball, but you shouldn't say that publicly on a recording or anything like that. But that book is, it's really good if you want to learn about automating stuff, and his code is as Pythonic as anybody wants it to be.
So I was actually coming out here to say something completely different, but oh crap, I just spaced out. It's not the Zen Python. It's another Kenneth Reitz thing. What is it? The Hitchhiker's Guide to Python, right? So that'll tell you the best practices of stuff to kind of get an idea, am I doing this the right way or not? The other thing I was going to say is if you are an Indie, it's the other meetup that we were talking about, which is the Indie Open Tech Study Hall. You can come. There's a bunch of nerds there. We can look at it, tell you hey, maybe you should do it this way, or whoa, we wouldn't have thought of that. That's pretty cool. So we can steal your idea, whatever you came up with. And I mean, there's a lot of meetups out there that there's a lot of other study hall sort of things or code review. Yeah, so it's good. What do you got, Alex?
All right. There's a site that I very much enjoy using from time to time called Check.io, Checkio. And it basically has a bunch of small challenges. They'll have tests written, and you just try and solve the problem so that all the tests pass. But then once you've completed it, you can see how other people have solved it and vote on those to see. So seeing it other ways is a nice way to learn.
Yeah, and that's actually another amazing way to learn stuff is just go look at other projects and just dig into them. So at some point you're going to run into a problem you can't figure out, and you've got to look at somebody else's code, and you'll either figure out this is freaking horrible or this is amazing, like the way that they designed this thing and looked at it. So you'll get an idea of whether you're doing it right or wrong, and just kind of dig into it and maybe pick a simple project and just see how it's built that's similar to what you're trying to solve, and you can kind of get an idea. Or just a library that you're using to solve that problem. You can see the code structure for that and get an idea of how maybe I could change my code structure to match that a little bit more. So like you can get, I don't know, it kind of depends on the library, but for some stuff it's easy, especially if you look at the tests and kind of figure out, hey, this is what they're doing, this is why they're doing it. So like you can kind of get in their mindset, and that can kind of help you figure out how to build your code out and have it be more coherent or better or more Pythonic, right?
Another thing I think that doesn't get represented very well is the actual computer science side of some of this stuff, where you can really, I don't know, you owe it to yourself to figure out what programming is and like how to understand this, like a language like Python and what being Pythonic means, but also you can take a step back and watch some videos or read some stuff about the theory of computation and other things in a more like high-level abstract way, and that's where you might feel more confident about how efficient is your program, or you might learn about some interesting algorithm or some other aspect of what you're doing to validate or explore a new area.
I was just going to say, to piggyback on like the whole idea of like exercises, there's a command line kind of thing called exorcism, spelled like the ritual, but with an E-X-E-R.
As an exercise.
Yeah, exercise-ism. So I probably explained that worse than if I just spelled it. So yeah, that's pretty slick too, if you want to try that out. Do I have to sit up here the whole time until I'm tagged out?
No, until someone tags you out.
Okay.
Look somebody in the eyes and make them feel guilty.
Yeah. Shit. Just made me forget what I was going to say.
The other thing to kind of piggyback on this is watching videos, just any talks from any of the regional conferences or PyCon. You'll get to see what other people are doing with code, and you'll figure out whether that person's doing good stuff or bad stuff, and kind of get a good idea on whether you should be emulating what they're doing or what someone else is doing.
So I think someone kind of mentioned like reading other people's code, and on that same like thing, besides just reading other people's code, read the Python style guides. So if you read PEP 8 and PEP 419 or something like that, which is like the documentation guides and stuff like that, PEPs are Python enhancement proposals. If you read those, they'll really give you a lot of reasoning behind why things are done this way. So like why sometimes it's better to write this shorter than long, or why it's better to write this longer than short. And then on top of that, there's also a tool called Python Black, which is it's only there for style. But if you read through the reason why they've picked the name and the style that they use, they give you a lot of examples of why this is better for your code to be that way. And sometimes, and a lot of times actually, the answer is it's not faster. It's just so that we can quit arguing. This is the answer. And that's really like, because if you're writing Python, you're not writing performant code. Like that's not your goal. You're writing maintainable code, right? If you want to write performant code, you write assembly, and then you can't maintain it, and you have a lot of security flaws. But Python is just for maintainable code, you know what I mean? So like, you don't have to worry about all of this Pythonicness. Like, you can call up Guido, and he'll tell you the same thing.
You're up here, Alex.
Oh, the seat just looked warm.
Oh, okay.
Well, we got 46 seconds.
Did we answer your question at all? Yeah. All right.
Go out. I can't hear you unless you're sitting up.
Spaces or tabs?
You're an idiot for asking that question. Fair enough. I'll allow it. And with that, we're out of time.